Hey, happy, beautiful day. Dr. Bob Rakowski here, wellness transformation expert. With this edition of Doc Talk, I am here with Gabe Guru, Gabe Roberts, with his new book, From Pain to Purpose. I think you're going to find this conversation, I know, beyond enlightening, because what Gabe has achieved in his own life and what he contributes to the world is absolutely epic. So get ready, have a notepad ready, because your life can change for the better now. Let's dive right into it. So we're talking about quantum physics today, and you were giving me a little interesting history lesson. So let's turn back the clock. Tell me when you see it starting or having started, even though it's been around forever, not named that way, and your evolution with it.
Well, officially, they started to put the scientific data together in the Solvay Institute in 1927, where 18 of the most brilliant minds in an unprecedented meeting have got together, and their sole purpose was looking closer at the building blocks of the world, of the universe, what made up the universe. And of course, this included John Wheeler, Albert Einstein, Schroeder, Madame Marie Curie was the only female there. Several people that were, at least half of them were Nobel Prize winners, and the rest of them would go on to be that. So these were just brilliant minds. And when they started to, their whole purpose was to dissect the atom, because up until this point, in October of 1927, the atom was believed to be a solid structure. And even in our fifth grade classes, we can think back to the times when we used styrofoam balls and toothpicks and little colored balls and dowel rods, putting atoms together and assuming that they were solid objects. But this meeting, as they dove into that subatomic particles, they found there was no substance there at all. It just it behaved completely different than the physical world, the mechanical, predictable world does. And this was in 1927, but there's books written before that. Wallace Wattles is one of those authors who points out that there's a formless substance that penetrates the entire world that's amenable to suggestion. Another one is Genevieve Beran, Your Invisible Power. Books written far before this scientific discovery that said our world really isn't the way it appears to be. It doesn't operate the way it appears to be. And of course, today we still have that. Kind of influencing all government and all research and healthcare and things like that, to where they are under this mechanistic model of everything's solid and it has to have some kind of substance there, or it's not real validated. And homeopathy is another one of these things that sometimes gets it kind of gets a name of false or pseudo because there's no substance there. But what homeopathy is actually working on is waveform information, which is all quantum model stock and trade. So.
Well, you send my mind spinning when you share that information. So just to share, by the way, I just wrote the foreword to your new book, which is absolutely epic, helping people to, use this quantum wisdom to really heal PTSD. But, when I was digging into that, I thought, how did this all start? If we go back before the Big Bang, they actually suggest there was something called the Great Singularity, and all the mass and all the energy in the universe was in some tiny little ball, like the size of a golf ball. And that's how much empty space there really is. 99.9999999. One time I had read that if you took everything on Earth, every human on Earth, every substance on Earth, and really compressed out the empty space, it would be smaller than a sugar cube. Right. So,
right.
What's in your space? I remember that commercial about, I guess maybe it was Visa. What's in your wallet? What's in your space? Well, it's the energy we put there. So let's go in that direction. What's going on with energy in terms of really how it directs life and health, and how do you intervene in that to make it better?
You're absolutely right. First off, on the understanding that even though things appear separate, they are once from this singularity. And they estimate that before the Big Bang, there was something that all things in our universe were, compressed to the size of a green pea, is what I heard. A green pea golf ball. It's still pretty small. And it was so hot, millions and millions and millions of degrees, it exploded. And that became everything in our visible universe. And as you can tell from the research that they do with, telescopes, the universe just keeps expanding. They keep getting more and more in-depth images out in space and things like that. But all that was once part of one piece. Now, that means that everything is connected in some way, without a doubt. So with this new quantum model, all possibilities exist. An infinite level of possibilities exist. So think of this as like a cosmic internet where everything's available to us. The reality that you desire, the reality you dream about, whether it's opening a business or healing from some kind of chronic ailment, writing a book, or even writing a song, something that there's a deep desire in you that's telling you to do that, that is a possibility trying to express itself. And oftentimes our self-image is what keeps that repressed. So another way of saying this is we all have access to this cosmic internet of infinite possibility and probability. And it's our self-image, which is a lens of how we view reality that's formed between conception and around 5 years old. That determines the bandwidth of our self-image. And the reason I came to this conclusion after years of research, I would say in my own personal journey, one of the originating pieces of this was whenever I was first meeting you and we were at Vegas. Remember we were walking in through the casino one of these mornings going to the real big OG conference, and Diana Nielsen, I think I'm saying her name, Diane Nielsen, was on stage. And I remember she was walking back and forth and she said, if you're giving out the coffee and you're not getting people, it's not the coffee. And and that's where it kind of stopped. But my mind just kept going. I was like, what's that mean? Because I'm that person. What does that mean? What's that mean? I knew it was me, but I wasn't sure on any kind of further implications. I wasn't aware of what to do or what to change to make it to where I could be more successful. And long story short, I found it was because of the earliest building blocks of my life, painted how I thought, how I felt, what my beliefs were, what my expectations were about life. And of course, the quantum model is like a giant mirror because everything existed at one point and it exploded out as the Big Bang. Although we might seem with our senses like mass is different, okay? There's space between this bonsai tree and this wooden thing behind me. There's space between where you and I are right now. But what's important is that energy is still entangled. That energy, because it was once here, is still entangled. And they know this from studies. It's called quantum entanglement. They've taken two particles, separated them, and particles are what make up our physical world. So particles are the tiniest building block between what are called particles and quarks. They're the tiniest building block of what makes up our physical world. And they've separated these two particles. And then when they would influence one by changing the direction, changing the charge, the other one simultaneously behave the same way. We'll take it to a larger scale. They've swapped cells of people, taken cells out of a person's mouth, put it in a petri dish, separate the distance by around 5 miles, and then they would show this person war videos and sexually explicit imagery. And as their chemistry reacted in the body from watching these images, the cells reacted 5 miles away. So this is just a smaller demonstration of the larger picture. Everything we want is still connected within that energy field. How do we start to make it work for us, right? Well, the first thing is we have to clear out the cobwebs. We have to clear out the interferences, the things that tell us deep, deep down why we don't deserve it, why, and this was certainly, I'm coming from my own personal experience now, why we don't deserve it, why we're not good enough, those kind of things. If there's something in there running, that has to be addressed first, because if we put up vision boards and we start doing affirmations and we start trying to think positively about things and blow up more images of what we want, yet we still have something deep down in that self-image contaminating the message, it's equivalent of taking a big glass of spring water that's ready to go, nice, fresh spring water, and taking an eyedropper out of a nasty pond and putting one drop into that. You contaminate it all. So you have to clear up the signal, and what you want actually be drawn to you much quicker. So it's not a matter of just thinking about what you want. It's a matter of clearing up the signal and changing those deeper programs. And everyone's a little different. Some people might respond really well to affirmations just depending on their load from 0 to 5 years old. Some people that have had a tremendous amount of trauma, I could say, childhood trauma, they had a lot more things going on in their life when they were 0 to 5. They're going to definitely have to pick out those little pieces before their signal is fully clear enough for the quantum mirror to respond accordingly.
There's so much in that, and how interesting to unpack. So if we start going way back, you mentioned Wallace Wattles, and he said it's not doing certain things, but it's doing things in a certain way. Maybe we expand that from what you just said to actually showing up in a certain way. And there's a lot of programming that influences how we show up. And let's face it, I think most people really aren't aware of how they show up, except to maybe look at their results. So how do you dive into that and start chiseling away at it?
Well, I love how you said a certain way. And that's exactly what he kind of alludes to in The Science of Getting Rich. That's a book I've probably read probably a dozen times, because it's so rich with quantum truth in it. One of the things that's very important for us to know is we do have a choice on how we start to direct our lives. And one of the first things we want to do is just observe the results. We want to observe the results and see if they are where we want to be in our happiness, in our health, and in our material wealth. I think one of the first chapters in that book, The Science of Getting Rich, explains the right to be rich in such a beautiful way that it's just a natural expression of life, like a seed sprouting. It's important for people to realize that, because some of the old programming that many people carry, as he points out, is that there's not enough. And if you're going to be wealthy, well, that means you've probably done something wrong. You've probably swindled. You've probably broken laws. You probably cheated to attain that wealth. And that is a program that many people carry. And Wattles points out that no, wealth is just a normal expression of life itself, always for greater potential and expression. And the more we can start to do those things in our life, the more we can, whether it's just walking to the store and putting a shopping cart away that wasn't yours in a parking lot, just something like that, whether it's having a conversation with somebody in a parking lot, and deep down your intention is never to really do business with them, but leave them greater, leave them in a better mood, leave them with a little bit better insight than when you first started talking with them. The more we can expand and express ourselves through life, the more that quantum model mirrors back to us. So I think that's one of the biggest things. Like I said, it's a mirror, and how we respond to that in all ways is going to be how it reflects back to us. And we need to understand that you're working with non-physical, when you're doing this, we are non-physical beings, as my book goes into a tremendous amount of depth with all kinds of scientific evidence from the man, I can't think of his name right now, who's the tiger hunter, Jim Corbett, from him demonstrating that the lion staring at him, making the hair on the back of his neck stand up, to scientific studies where they look at brain scans and somebody stares at them and their brain lights up when the person's cortically blind. We are non-physical beings, so we need to have an awareness that when we're doing these things, don't expect our physical world to change right away, but it will, because all the physical stuff we see comes from the non-physical. So the minute we can start laying out greater expansion and expression in all ways to everything we come across, whether it's a shopping cart, whether it's going into a store and just like a happy, beautiful day, a greeting like that to someone, asking them how they're doing and genuinely being interested in what they say, that person's going to feel different than the last 10 customers that have come by and just said, "Hey, how you doing?" Check out and leave, right? So just giving greater expansion expression to everyone, you're going to get that reflected back to you. And again, it might take time. So it takes a little bit of understanding and not just immediately looking for the physical stuff to show up, but know you're working with the most valid of all science today, which is quantum physics, when you do these kind of things.
Well, one, it sounds like the law of sowing and reaping. And then we go with James Allen, As a Man Thinketh. And, I don't know what year that was written. I might want to look that up, but he said our environment is a looking glass. And I'll go with Stephen Covey, the most popular business book of the entire last century, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. He says there's one law that's always constant, the law of the farm. We reap what we sow. But keep in mind, you're planting a harvest. It doesn't grow tomorrow. You don't put the seed in and have a harvest the next day. You've got to go through this entire process. So now let's talk about from pain to purpose. So pain is a universal experience, right? We've all had it. And then we could even go to the Buddhist philosophy. Pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional. So let's dive into how that led to this, I'll call it a quantum leap for you and the many you serve.
Right. So you're right about pain is an option. Suffering is a choice, because pain has to occur anytime we decide to change. And that's one thing. When we're talking about transforming into a different person, if we look at our results and we say, I'm not happy overall. I'm not happy with my health, my wealth, my just overall state, my overall mood, how I feel in my own home. And we have to understand that to change that is uncomfortable and at times going to be painful. If we decide that we're just going to stay where we are because it's the comfort zone, then we've made the choice to suffer. And that's the difference between pain and suffering. Pain is temporary as you're transforming. Suffering is deciding I'm just going to stay where I'm at, and through just a natural growth of progress, compounding things. If you're suffering right now, if you're in pain right now from not changing, within 5 years from now, that pain is only going to grow tremendously. And that's just how things are. My own endeavor with this was I had, again, like I mentioned, a poor self-image most of my life. Whenever I started to be around you years ago, I really made the choice that I wanted more. I was actually on the way back from that diamond camp. On the way back from the diamond camp, there was a moment when I was in your backyard, Dr. Bob, and we had several people around, several fantastic friends of yours, people that have remained friends of mine, Paul and Roland, were sitting out there, and they went around the table and they're discussing different things. And when it came my turn, I felt out of place. I felt like, these were successful people, and I just deep down, I felt out of place. It was my soul kind of giving me some insights on things outside of what my brain thought. It was my heart speaking to me. And I got to talking with these people, and I did a little bit of some energy work on them, did some adjusting on them with Best. And on the flight home, it really dawned on me. My results that I could obtain with people did not match my results at my house. That was a real insider. And so when I got home to Tiffany, I told her, we're done living like this. That was the first thing I said. We're done living like this. And I'll never forget. She goes, well, what are we going to do? Because she was tired of living that way too. And I said, I don't know. I don't know. All I know is we're done living like this. So then I just started studying myself. I realized it was an inside problem. I started studying myself and realizing that it had to do with my early self. I've since then I've probably had several hundred mentors that have paved the way for me to understand this and learn how to change it and learn the things that why change is difficult. And these are all things I point out in the book. The critical faculty, I go into a lot of depth with that. I even bring up the allegory of the cave, which is the Plato. So these things have existed, like you mentioned, these books, this is written in 50 million different books, and it's older than the pyramids. As you sow, so shall you reap. It's written in 50 million different books. It's been around for a long time. And yet people still don't understand the answers within them. And it really starts with having a desire and making a decision. And that's what happened to me. I made a decision. And whenever I started to do that, and I started to use these holographic techniques, and I was doing everything from hypnosis to EMI to emotional freedom technique to try to change these old programs. And like I mentioned before, working with over 5,000 patients now through Zoom, changing their programming, helping them with trauma, what I've learned is everyone has their own load. Some people have a bucket full. Some people have a pickup bed full, and some people have an aircraft carrier equivalent of loading. And it doesn't matter as long as you start picking away and changing those things and understanding that some of it's going to be uncomfortable, you will notice that reflection in that quantum mirror starts to change. And when that happens, there's a bit of excitement because you know you're on the right path. And I knew there was so much inside of me and so much I had learned, and my results had shifted so quickly. Not just my results and my happiness and being very comfortable in my own skin, being comfortable in my wife. Every time I learned a new technique on changing, here's what's so beautiful. I went and showed it to her, and she started working on her own stuff right away. So we grew together, which is a real blessing to have my own wife, knowing that she's grown on the inside just as much as I am. So that way we grow together. And our results changed so quickly that we went from showing a few techniques online to having a bunch of doctors email us say, what was that? To having a certification class, to now having our own university. So now we're founders of what's called Psychosomatic University, a credited PhD program for doctors and chiropractors of all kinds, where we teach them these aspects of mind and body in very, very in-depth ways using a number of resources. And I just knew that there was so much in me. I was like, I got to get a book out, and I got to get at least one book. When you're writing a book, you want to just cram everything you know into it. And then it's like, no, okay, let me just focus on this. And I'm already in the works for another one. So to get this out to people, as many hands as possible, is very important to me, because I think that we are on the cusp of a shift in humanity right now. The old models of the Newtonian models, the things we're seeing, the things we've seen over the last few years, since 2020, these are all signs that we have to change. Something has to give. If we're to survive as a species, there has to be an entirely new model that comes into our awareness that we live by. And in my opinion, a big part of this model is going to be a shift in perception, a shift in consciousness, a shift in who we really are from who we think we are. That needs to really become apparent to people.
Well, you just repeated what I just heard Brett Weinstein say the other day. And, he's such an absolute brainiac and connected to higher level consciousness. So you decided to focus on post-traumatic stress. And by the way, they call it post-traumatic stress disorder, which is kind of an interesting, does it have to be a disorder? And how universal is it? I mean, does nearly everybody have it? Does everybody have it? What's the difference between those that actually are going to experience post-traumatic growth, which is really what your life is about, versus those that stay stuck in post-traumatic stress?
Right. I will say this: we are all affected by trauma, no doubt. It's such an ingrained part of our culture that who knows where it starts. I mean, did it start with the amoeba? Who knows? But it's been such an ongoing thing that there's parts of it that are ingrained in us very heavily, and so we're all impacted by trauma. And when I say trauma, many times I've had people contact me, a woman I had a contact me once who had chronic pain in her stomach, and she had done everything, acupuncture, all kinds of different herbal remedies. She tried conventional care, and her stomach pain remained. And whenever I started talking to her about trauma, she said, I never had any trauma, Gabe. My parents were so loving and so accepting. And I said, okay, well, the only source that knows where this pain and why the pain is your subconscious mind. And it's not just the most common depiction of the subconscious is it's a part of us that records everything from conception on. But this is also a universal mind, like we talked about with the quantum entanglement. This is the part of us that's aligned with everything and everyone in some way. It's what governs our gut feelings. If you're walking down an alley and something tells you, don't go this way, and you turn around, you notice there's a shady person behind a dumpster, that's your subconscious mind protecting you, your internal GPS. So I asked this woman's subconscious to take us to the very source of the pain. Suddenly she's 3 years old. She's outside in her front yard at nighttime, and their chicken coop where they had their chickens was in a big thing. It was just a big burst of fire. And her parents are running around scrambled, and this little girl is just standing there screaming and crying because of the overwhelm. So it could be something like that, not necessarily something that occurred from parental, but just an environmental overwhelm. All of that from our culture has lost its parenting instincts. Our culture has lost its parenting instincts. That's a big, big part too. In fact, there's a group of scientists right now studying a small group of people who have the most in-tuned parenting instincts, and those are hunter-gatherer tribes, because for proper brain development for the first few years, we're meant to be held at all times, and these hunter-gatherers never let their children touch the ground for the first 3 years. So that we're meant to be touched. We're meant to be held and caressed and welcomed. So we've all been touched by trauma. And what happens when we're not in those early years, there's a part of us that gets constricted. And like I said, everyone has their different loads. Some people have a pretty light load. Some people, like my case, I had a dump truck. Some other cases I've seen, they've got a whole fleet of dump trucks. So I would say trauma does play a role in us. PTSD is a moment like this young girl I was describing. That could be described as PTSD. But the problem with trauma and PTSD is it's very subjective too. It's unique for each person. So it's hard to put a criteria on it. And even in my book, I talk about the I almost want to say disappointing, but it's not really disappointing. The confusion that comes to be when they're trying to diagnose a group of people, and it seemed the criteria was the exact same for people that had the 9-to-5 office job, that went to work every day, they fought traffic, they did your just normal routine life, versus people that had actually experienced battles, that experienced being in car bombings. The criteria for them was nearly identical despite the history. So we all are carrying some PTSD where we get triggered by things, where a smell, a taste, a random thought, which we have 15 to 50 times an hour. Our mind takes trips 15 to 50 times an hour. And all we need to do is think about one thing, and our brainwave changes instantly, and our physiological processes in our body match as if that process is happening right now. So it does impact all of us in some way. Like I said, it's just a difference in the load and the life experiences that we've had that have compounded those. And that's going to determine how much those things trigger us and how impactful those triggers are, versus something comes and goes and we just kind of go on as routine business, or something comes and goes and we decide, I'm staying home the rest of the day. I'm just going to sit here in my living room. So it does really impact all of us to some degree, but how much the load is on us is it varies about as much as our fingerprints do.
So Gabe, I want to summarize this in some way. So if we look around us and everything is exactly as we want it, well, guess what? It's always changing, and we're always growing, and we're always thriving, and staying stuck. That's really what suffering is all about. But if you're not seeing exactly what you want and you're not sure why, chances are there's something that needs to be cleaned up in that subconscious. And many, many, many sages have said that. And you put together the manual to do it, 300 plus epic pages of rock solid research, examples, practical ways for people to do it themselves. So everybody needs to pick up the book, read it. You're going to get a heck of an education and likely a better life. But you know what? I know there's an advantage to working with you directly. So two things. One, in your experience, how much faster is it with a guide like yourself that's beyond experience, 5,000 plus in your own life and around the world? And then secondly, how do people get a hold of you?
Those are great questions. The book, I think, is depending on the person's load, it's going to definitely help them. For somebody that has a heavier load, having a guide like me go in and really take care of some nuclear type things very quickly. There's some things that are obviously too complex to put in a book. So I can do some pretty significant work with some people, batch releases and things like that, where we take care of some major stuff pretty quick. So that's the advantage of having a guide like me or one of our trained therapists helping them out. And the other thing is there's just no substitute for working with someone, because I can almost like a detective. I can find that initial sensitizing wound very quickly. It took me years to get to where I could decide if the subconscious is taking me on a route. Because sometimes when you go to work on those things, when you go to work on those deep wounds, depending on the person, sometimes the subconscious goes, I'll take you anywhere you want to go, but not there. So now you're kind of beating around the bush. You still get good change. You still get improvement, but there's still that festering wound there that will contaminate parts in your life. And through the years, I've become kind of a detective at being able to find that and decide if it's the time we take care of that, or if it's something the person's maybe not ready to change yet. And that does happen once in a while.
I like the way you said that. You know, my gosh, I mean, who hasn't been on a journey where they're saying, okay, I think this is the way to go, but yet it leads nowhere. And it could be our subconscious playing games with us. How fascinating is that? So where do we reach you? What's the best way to connect with you?
Our website, thesubconscioushealer.com is a great way. And you can also email us, and that is elevateyourfield@pm.me. So those are probably the best ways to get a hold of us.
Beautiful. Well, Gabe, I've absolutely enjoyed this conversation. Any parting words to our guests? Actually, we're never separated, right? We're always entangled. Everything's always working together and always working out for us. But what's your final wisdom to share?
I would say, and I point this out in my book, lots of times people hear this and they say, yes, I want to change something. I want to change something, but I don't know where to start. I would say this, that quantum mirror doesn't really respond to what you think as much as it responds to what you feel and really what your emotions are. So the best piece, and this is where once this came into my life, it was kind of the initiator. It was the spark that lit everything else, was really paying attention to what you get emotionally involved in. We're having an election year coming up. There's all kinds of disruptive cues in our environment, constantly keeping people emotionally connected, emotionally involved in things that aren't serving them. If you can just start to recognize that in yourself, a neighbor, cuts a limb and it falls over your fence, you can choose right then and there. Do you get upset about it, or do you let him say, hey, I made the mistake. Let's get this thing fixed. I'm going to take care of everything. And so you could have got emotionally worked up over something that resolved itself. Things on TV, you just look around and you can see people getting completely emotionally involved in politics and things like that, to the point where it just drives them crazy. Whatever you're emotionally involved in is what's going to really influence that quantum mirror back at you. So pay close attention. Is it taking you in the direction you want to go in improving your life? If it's not, I'll guarantee you it's taking you the opposite direction.
Yeah, my first nickname for you was the quantum janitor, right? Because you clean up a lot of stuff in the quantum field. But, I'm just going with Gabe Guru now, right? Because you are a banisher of darkness, and I absolutely appreciate that about you. So thank you so much. You're making our world better in so many ways, and we all benefit from it.
Dr. Bob, thank you so much. Fantastic seeing you today. And I really appreciate everything you've done, in the past. And like I said, being around you was one of those catalysts to me saying, I want more. Being around you, I saw how big a heart you had. I saw how you were, living the life. And I was like, that's what I want to do. So me rubbing shoulders with you was a catalyst to me shifting and changing myself. And for that, I'm deeply grateful for you. Tiffany and I both are.
Well, as Kelly and I, for you both.